Daphne DuMaurier's My Cousin Rachel is the story of the orphaned Philip Ashley, whose beloved guardian, his uncle Ambrose, dies in Italy under mysterious circumstances. Convinced his uncle was murdered, Philip meets with his mysterious widow at his newly inherited estate, only to fall under her spell himself. Hello and welcome to The Best Book Ever, the podcast where we get to know interesting people by asking them about their favorite book. I'm your host, Julie Strauss, and today I'm talking to Michelle Cox, author of the popular Henrietta and Inspector Howard mystery series set in 1930s Chicago. Michelle and I had a great time figuring out why this enduring Gothic novel remains a classic even now, 70 years after it was published, and how difficult it is to categorize into a neat genre. If you love books packed with atmospheric mystery and tantalizing ambiguous endings, you're going to love hearing why My Cousin Rachel is the best book ever. Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the Best Book Ever podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me, Julie.
I can already tell we're in for a good conversation here. But will you start by telling us about your reading life, Michelle? How did you come to be a reader?
It's a good question. I feel like I've always been a reader. So no one's ever asked me this exactly, but when I remember I was very little. I wasn't in kindergarten yet. I walked into the kitchen and I said to my mom, I pointed to the stove and I said, "That says Magic Chef." And she said, "Who told you that?" I said, "I don't know. I just read it." So I don't remember actually learning how to read. I just remember that I could read. And I think it was probably because my mom read to us so much. I started reading very, very young. And all through, my mom took us to the library a lot. I had a great relationship with my grade school librarian, Sister Madeline, who was this really, really old nun that had actually taught my grandfather. So she taught my grandfather, my father.
Gosh.
And then by the time I got there, she was, relegated to the library. But she just really, she was a sweet old lady. She had so much love for books, and she could tell that I really loved books too. And so she gave me, the privilege of the last day of school. I was allowed to go into the school library and take as many as I could carry.
Oh my God.
Home on the bus for the whole summer. And it was such a treat and such a privilege.
I would have pulled like a She-Hulk move. Did you just gather all of a sudden you've got biceps out to here? Did you just take everything you could get your hands on?
I tried so hard. And she didn't make me check them out. She didn't write them down. She just trusted that I would bring them all back. So, and then I remember going to when I got through with those, we would go to the library for the summer. And I remember I was probably, I don't know, maybe 12. And I said to my mom in the library, just like walking through the stacks and trying to decide what to pick. And I said, "Mom, do you just feel like I should read the classics? But do you think I should just read, like trash, whatever I want for the summer?" She's like, "Just read trash." And I'm like, "No, I got to read the classics." Even then. So I only read the classics, really. I mean, there were some deviations, but it wasn't until probably after my third kid was born and my mind was just shot. And I'm like, you know what? I can't read any more Dickens at this point or Shakespeare. I need something light. And that was when I first started reading contemporary fiction, which is why I'm so far behind, because I spent so many years just, reading classics. So I got to college. I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I did 2 years of pre-med. I kind of always wanted to be a writer, but I was too afraid. I thought that studying to be a doctor sounded easier than being a writer. Turns out it's true. No, just kidding. So I happened to be taking a Victorian lit class my junior year, and I thought, it just hit me like a lightning bolt. I'm like, what are you doing? This is where you're meant to be. So I switched my major. I did a lit major in 2 years, and I just really didn't look back. So.
All those years you were reading the classics and not reading contemporary literature, were you enjoying it, or was it more like checking things off a list?
No, I loved it. I
You did.
was just so, yeah, I really loved it. I came out with a lit degree, and that really set me up, for analysis and all that kind of stuff. And so I loved it. But like I said, when I started to, need something a little lighter, I of course turned to historical fiction because that was something that was still set in the past, but was easier to read than, reading Shakespeare or something like that. So, yeah.
So tell us about your writing. You write both novels and a very popular weekly blog about Chicago, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Will you tell our listeners about that?
Sure. I write the Henrietta and Inspector Howard series, which is a sort of a mystery romance set in the 30s in Chicago. And it is based on a woman that I met in a nursing home. So Henrietta was the protagonist, the heroine of the series. She's actually based on a real person who had this amazing life in the 30s and 40s in Chicago. And so a lot of what happens in book one of the series, which is called A Girl Like You, a lot of what happens in that book actually really happened to her. Of course, I had to invent the handsome, aloof inspector and the murder and all of that. But a lot of it really did happen. And that's also the basis of my weekly blog, which is dedicated to forgotten residents of Chicago. So I just take a different story I heard in the nursing home and tell that story every week. And that has been hugely successful. The blog has its own following, separate from my readers of the series, because so many people just love those quick, true stories of ordinary people in Chicago and what they went through, what they lived through. And they're just real gems of history.
Why are you at the nursing home? Do you work there or volunteer?
Yes, I had a job there so I got out of college with a lit degree. Just pretty much useless unless you're going to teach. And I got a job at a graphic arts firm, lithography, because the old school term, and hated it. And then I started working as the admissions director at it was called the Bohemian Home for the Aged and Orphans. So it was very old. Of course, there was no orphans there when I got there, but it was a very unique kind of nursing home, and it many Czech and Polish residents there. But I was spending so much time sitting with residents and like listening to their stories instead of being in my office, like, chasing ambulances and calling up hospitals saying, "Hey, do you have anybody for us?" That the administrator was like, he called me into his office one day and I'm like, "I'm going to get fired." He's like, "Look, this isn't working." I'm like, so he's like, "You know what? We're going to move you into social service." And I'm like, "Oh my God, that's my dream job." So I became the social service director, and then it was my job to sit and listen to people and try to help them and all that kind of stuff. So it was great.
And hear all these stories, which then sparked your imagination.
Well, first of all, I'll say to anybody out there, if you're a writer and you're searching for ideas, just go sit in a nursing home for about 2 weeks and you'll have more stories than you could ever use.
Mm.
And one of the details from this woman that I based Henrietta on was that she was a 26 girl. And apparently that's something that was only unique to Chicago. It was a dice game that was played in taverns, and there were women who would keep score, but really their real job was to push drinks. So this woman really wasn't a 26 girl. And so I made Henrietta a 26 girl, and I was doing some research, and I found a bar that had once upon a time had 26 girls, was not too far from where the fictional Henrietta lived. And they have a back room, the Hideout is the name of the bar, but where they produce a show that's on PBS now called The Interview Show. So I'm like, I have to go to this bar, even though I live like an hour north of the city. So I went there and I found out that they have this interview show and that they broadcast it on PBS. And I'm like, I have to be on the show. It was meant to be. You have to have me. So I spent 3 years going to this bar and, on and off and watching the show and introducing myself to the host and blah, blah, blah. And I finally got on it. So I'm like, I have to do this for Henrietta. I just have to do it. So yeah, there's a lot of stories.
My friends, I know you've just barely settled into your pumpkin spice latte season, and now I have the audacity to point out that the holidays are coming upon us fast. I'm hard at work on my 3rd annual Kids in YA gift-giving episode, where I interview a bunch of young people about books, and I would love to talk to your favorite young reader. This is my most popular episode every year, and my favorite to record because kids are my favorite people. If you know a young person, ages 5 to 20, who would like to tell me about a book, I would love to talk to them. Check the show notes or go to my website, bestbookeverpodcast.com, and click on the button that says, Be a guest on the 3rd annual Kids YA gift-giving guide. I can't wait to hear from you. Now, back to the show. Now, do you remember how you found this book that we're talking about today, My Cousin Rachel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to bill my series, instead of sometimes calling it a mystery romance series, I think of it as a romantic suspense. And because the romance is very much tied to the mystery, and they're sort of both unfolding at once. But when I found out that most romantic suspense books have a cover with a guy with, his shirt off, like that's definitely not my book. But I did a little research, and I think Daphne DuMaurier is considered the inventor of the romantic suspense. And so I'm like, well, if this is what you think you're writing, you should probably read the master of it and see, how your work compares to hers. So I finally broke down and read it, and I just loved it.
Will you tell our listeners what My Cousin Rachel is about?
Well, yeah, it's about this man whose guardian, who he's very close to, he thinks of as a father, goes off to Italy for his health and marries a woman, a very young woman, who claims to have some sort of, connection to the family. So anyway, this is very strange to the young man, Philip, because his guardian has never been interested in women before. And then he suddenly writes to him and says, oh, by the way, I'm getting married. And then he starts to get other letters saying, she's now my torturer. She's poisoning me. I'm dying. Please come help me. So he dashes off, and eventually she ends up coming over to England to meet him, and he's determined to hate him and quickly begins to fall in love with her. And so the whole story is did she poison the guardian? Did she not? Is she guilty? Is she not? It's really, the whole novel is a huge question of who's lying, who's telling the truth, who really killed who. It's fantastic. I loved it. And even at the end, you still really don't know. You really don't know.
And I was thinking as I was reading this, that this trope of, is something happening or is the main character going insane?
Yes.
Is possibly my favorite in all of literature. It is possibly my favorite thing to read. And it is such a fine needle to thread. It's something I've tried to write several times without success. It's so hard. It's really, really difficult because it's so easy to tip into, oh, he's just nuts. Right. And this one is so subtle. And you're right. At the end, you're pretty sure you know what's going on, but a little bit unsure. It's possible. That last line, I was like, wait, so what does that mean?
Yeah. And I wonder if that would fly today. If this type of novel, if it came out now if readers would accept this sort of ambiguous ending, because that's not quite so popular these days.
It seems to me that the last minute twist is really popular, but the last minute question, not so much.
Exactly. Yeah. That I really think that's true. But for me, I loved it because you're left thinking about it for days. You're just wondering. And I think she was able to get away with this. I think she wrote this, it was published, I think, in the 50s, right?
Yeah, I have 1952 in my notes.
Right. But it is set, I think it's the 1800s. And I think that gives her a little bit of license. So I think that writing that trope that you were talking about, is something really going on, or is the person insane? That's a little bit harder, I think, to write as a contemporary novel. I think it might be a little easier to do that with a historical lens.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's more difficult to prove anything. So you don't have forensics, and you don't have, an autopsy, and all this kind of stuff. It's ambiguous.
Also, we have a totally different understanding of mental health.
Yeah, which is why, there's a lot of mental health issues in my series as well, and it's easier to get away with it because, as you're saying, there's a huge misunderstanding of different mental conditions, and you, as an author, you can kind of play on that, and that gives you sort of a lot of license to come up with plot twists and all that kind of stuff.
And there's also the gender relation aspect, which is so different, which I thought was great in a historical context, because there's, we have these two bachelors living in this estate in England, and he says several times Ambrose was his uncle, right? His right. Guardian.
Yes.
Was never interested in women. And so I thought, I wonder what's going on here. Are we confirmed bachelors? What's going on? But then Ambrose falls head over heels for her.
Right.
And then Philip, who I also thought was a quote unquote confirmed bachelor, falls head over heels for this woman. And then I thought, I suppose in that day, you really could just be so isolated from female society that he had, because there were a couple of moments where you think, come on, Philip. It's pretty clear what's happening here.
Yes.
But I could also understand how he just would have no concept of how women worked at all. Like, he loses his mind the first time she starts crying. He says, you have to get out of this room because I've never seen a woman cry before.
Right, which is amazing.
Right.
And I think there's a line where he says that the only women that had ever been allowed in the house were the dogs, which I'm like, wait a minute.
Well, and his lawyer's daughter, who's says is almost like a cousin to, or a sister to him, but he doesn't think of her as a woman at all.
No, right, which is very weird to me. You wonder, could that really have happened? Could they have really been so isolated that they had no knowledge of the female sex?
Yeah,
I guess. Yeah.
Well, it certainly helped Rachel.
Right. Twist both of them around her finger.
Have you read other Daphne DuMaurier books?
No, I haven't, but I bought a bunch of them after this because I loved her writing so much. I really felt like she is able to write as if she were a classical writer. And I think that is kind of the goal maybe of all historical fiction writers, is to be able to sound like you actually wrote this book in the 1800s. And I think that she does an amazing job at that. So
do you feel like it holds up in 2022?
I do.
Yeah.
I think it could easily, be a very popular book, except for, the ambiguous ending. I'm not sure how that would fly these days, but I certainly liked it. And also, I'm not sure, you would probably know, being a romance writer, all romances, as far as I know, have to have a happily ever after.
Right.
And I'm not sure this one does. And I don't know if that applies to romantic suspense. Maybe that you don't have that sort of formula where you have to have a happy ending. I don't know.
I read that she was known as a popular romance author and she hated the term.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I can see why, because this to me is not a romance at all.
It's really not.
In modern genre, I would call it thriller or thriller suspense, maybe, or suspense with a romantic element. But
that sounds more like it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely anything these days, any book that is classified in the romance genre, by definition, has a happily ever after, right? Or HFN, we also say happy for now.
Yes, right. Which this also doesn't have.
Which this does not have. No, so I don't think, if this were released now, I don't think it would be considered anywhere near romance.
Or romantic suspense, no? I don't think so.
See, this is what's so great about this book this is that line I was telling you about, is what's actually happening. Is he sane or is he not sane? You can read it either way. He's being manipulated and taken for everything he's got, or he is misreading everything and he's losing his mind. I don't know. Or she's innocent and he really does love someone innocent and then he ruins it all. Any of those things could be true.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But I do think you're right. It's not your traditional romance. It's not about two people falling in love. It's about the concept of romance or love, and whether, as you're saying, whether it's really real or not. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I know we mentioned the movie before we started the recording. I did catch something at the very beginning of the movie that I didn't remember from the book, where he says he's coming back from school and he's like, I found that I didn't like cities, didn't like being around a lot of people, didn't like clever conversation. And I thought, is that setting us up for him not really being all that intelligent and being, easily manipulated? But you would think, having been away to school, been in a big city, he has had some exposure, at least 4 years of, the way the modern world works, modern at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he comes back and he's almost, still an innocent. So I thought that was an important detail.
Yeah. And that's kind of implied in the book as well. He says that he's not one for conversations. And even when he starts to become infatuated with Rachel, she sits and does her sewing and he just likes to watch her.
Yes. Right.
And he doesn't like when people come for dinner and she's distracted by other company. Which is also creepy. The whole thing
is creepy.
God, I just felt like I was being sort of smothered a little bit. It was such a delicious book because it felt very physical to me, because there were times where you just felt absolutely crushed by that house.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought not only did you have the whole thing that's going on between Philip and Rachel, but I loved the fact that the reader is all the whole time trying to figure out what happened to Ambrose.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all of these great secret letters that he finds where the uncle is saying, she's trying to kill me. And he's trying to figure out, is he insane? Even as the reader's trying to figure out, not only is Ambrose insane, but is Philip insane?
Right.
It's just, it's like a layer within a layer within a layer. And it just was so, you almost felt as excited as Philip did when he would find these old letters, because you're like, oh, more of the mystery. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
I started about midway through the book. I noticed that he always used all three words, my cousin Rachel, every time he talked about her. And then my cousin Rachel picked up her sewing. And then my cousin Rachel ate her dinner. And so I started underlining it. There's one page where he says all three words, my cousin Rachel, 5 times on one page. And I thought it was such a masterful stroke, because it was like, remember being a teenager and you had a crush on someone and you just wanted to say their name for any reason. You know what I mean? Like, you just look for any reason to say that name.
Yes.
And I saw the exact moment where it switched to him saying, Rachel picked this up, and I circled it. And I don't know, maybe that was the writer in me, but it was really interesting to watch the swap. At first he calls her Mrs. Ashley, and then he calls her my cousin Rachel and he says it a lot. And then it's after a significant moment, it switches to Rachel.
Do you think that he was saying it so much as a way of convincing himself or reminding himself that this is my cousin? When really, it's interesting too, because he refers to her as his cousin, which she is technically, but he's also kind of like his stepmother.
Ew. Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
But that connection is never made. And so it's almost like, is it easier for him to refer to her as my cousin Rachel instead of my stepmother? Or is he reminding himself she's my cousin, so I really shouldn't go after her in a romantic way?
No, because I don't think they had that barrier in that day and in that,
that's true.
Upper crust English, the gentry society,
right.
Ambrose married her, and he
was
technically her cousin too. I hadn't thought about the stepmother angle. That gives me the willies.
Right. So it's a little bit incestuous.
Yep.
Because he, right? Which is just, it's kind of creepy.
Listener, you can't see this, but we are both grinning madly. The second she said it's incestuous, we both smiled really big there. It's
right.
Weird how great this complication is.
I just thought it was brilliant, but not overdone. It was just the right touch. It's perfect.
Now, so tell me about the movie, because again, as I was getting prepared to talk to you, it had never registered to me that there was a movie about this, although Rachel Weisz is one of my favorite actors. You know, there's something so mysterious about her face. And as soon as I saw that she was Rachel, I went, perfect, because she doesn't give you everything in her face.
No.
And I'm not sure, there are certain actresses, if they were Rachel, you would know right away. Oh, I know you did it. Mm-hmm. But with her, I don't know. I don't know.
There's a quiet intensity to her.
Perfectly said. Quiet intensity. Yeah. So what did you think of the movie adaptation?
I thought the beginning, the whole backstory with Ambrose was a little rushed, but I knew obviously they have to get through the whole book in an hour and a half, so fine. I thought it was the atmosphere, the cinematography was great. I think they really set the stage. And I also think it was really interesting how the house itself transformed as the movie went along, from being this sort of like big dump to being this sort of, nice place. The thing that I thought the performances were great. But I just hated the way it ended. It was really rushed, and it didn't exactly follow the book. I mean, they tried. I mean, but it wasn't as ambiguous, I didn't think.
Okay.
And they tried to. So you didn't see it?
I haven't seen it. I'm actually going to watch it tonight, because I really didn't even know it existed, and I wanted to talk to you first because I didn't want that clouding my judgment of the book when I was talking to you. But I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping I'm not spoiling it for you, but I feel like it was sort of more of a Hollywood ending, where they wanted to end it on a positive note. So I won't say anymore.
When I looked up the trailer, I watched the trailer on YouTube, and I saw this comment that said, "Ever since I saw Get Out, I don't trust any white woman who serves me tea."
Yes, right. Right away. Don't drink it.
Well, I loved this. I had so much fun reading it, and I couldn't believe that it was so compelling. You know how frequently you read classics that were considered scandalous or giant mysteries at the time, and then you read them and you kind of go, I called it, and I had so much. I couldn't believe how well it held up. It's just such a great read.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it really stands the test of time. It's not heavy. It's a great read. It's an easy read, which is not always the case.
So, Michelle, tell me what you're reading right now.
I'm actually just finishing this book, which I know your listeners can't see. It's Kate Atkinson, Life After Life. And it is a fantastic, fantastic book. I love it.
What's it about?
I don't want it to end. It's about this woman who she's born in 1910, and she keeps dying and coming back. So it's like she keeps repeating her life over and over until she gets it right. So the first chapter starts in 1910 when she's born, and the first chapter is only a few paragraphs long because she dies in birth. So that's life number one.
Oh my gosh.
So then you turn the page and it's 1910 again, and it's the same scenario, only one little detail, like the doctor didn't get stuck in the snow on the way to the house. So she made it. And then, she ends up dying in the sea when she's 3. And then, it starts all over again. But one little thing has changed, which prevents her from drowning. So, but the way that Kate Atkinson just writes this book, I mean, I am just in awe of her writing, because every reiteration, I mean, if you just wrote the same thing, it would be so boring. But she changes it so much, and she puts in so many different details in every iteration that it's just so well done. So that by the time you get to, she goes through the war and all this kind of stuff, you just feel like you know this family so well, because you know so many aspects of their life, because she shows so many different things each time. It's really amazing. It's just so well done.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, definitely pick it up.
I've read of hers Behind the Scenes at the Museum, which is my older daughter's all-time favorite book. And she kept pressing it on me, and I kept going, that doesn't sound like something for me. And I finally read it, and it was one of those books that I regretted. I couldn't believe it took me that long to read. It's weird. This woman starts narrating her life literally from the moment she's conceived.
Oh.
Which sounds weird, right? But
similar.
You're now in this book where I think she's one of those writers where you can hear that premise and go, Kate Atkinson can do this. I'm gonna trust her with this one, right?
Yes.
Like as you were describing that book, I was thinking, if it had been anyone else but Kate Atkinson, I might say, oh, that's gonna be boring.
Yeah.
But because I knew you were talking about her, I was thinking, oh, I bet that's so good.
It's very good. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to pick it up.
Do it. And I'll pick up this one.
Okay.
Exchange.
Good. We'll have a Kate Atkinson party. Good.
Hey, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. Will you tell my listeners where they can find you online?
Oh, sure. You can just go to my website, michellecoxwrites.com, and you will find the blog and all the weekly stories, and you will find all my social media buttons where you can click and connect with me across the channels. So, yeah. And please sign up for my newsletter, because I do huge giveaways every couple months. And I'm talking like iPad, a set of books, set of luggage, jewelry, scarves. I put together this gigantic prize package, and one lucky subscriber wins. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah,
you're really giving away the good stuff.
Yeah.
Super. Okay. Thank you. Well, this has been so much fun talking to you. I feel like I found a new reading pal.
Yay.
And I hope you will come back anytime you have a book you want to tell me about. This has been a blast talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd love to come back.
I would love to hear if you've read My Cousin Rachel or seen either of the movie adaptations and what you thought. Let me know over on Instagram at Best Book Ever Podcast. Links to everything we discussed are in the show notes or at my website, bestbookeverpodcast.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your favorite mystery-loving friend. and rate it on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for joining me today, and I will see you at the library.